In the video about why the Next Mutation TV show failed, I mentioned that there was supposed to be a fourth Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie, but that it wasn't made. In this video, we'll talk a little bit about what the movie was meant to be and why it never came to be. The story of the first three films is a bit of a strange one. We've already talked about how good the first film was and how faithful it was to the comic books. The second movie was cheesier, and it was definitely a step down in quality, but it was still enjoyable. Although, having said that, I think it's more enjoyable for those of my generation rather than younger audiences of today, using dated cultural references like Vanilla Ice, for example. But then we get to the third movie, and we'll probably have to do a separate video on this at some point because there's a lot to talk about. But for now, we can just say that it was a big departure from the first two films, and ultimately, it was just very poorly written. And it performed poorly too, not just in comparison to the first two movies, but just generally speaking for a film with such a wide release. And you see, that's the start of this story, because the first movie was a massive success in the box office. For a $13.5 million budget, it took $202 million, and that's not even taking into account home video and merchandise. The second movie, however, cost $25 million to make and only brought in just under $80 million. And then we get to the third movie, and this had dropped to $55 million for a similar budget to the second movie. So it's not just that there were diminishing returns. A studio would be justified in thinking that a fourth movie would either bring in a smaller profit or not even make a profit at all. They would have had to be very confident in the script to greenlight it. The thing is though, while there's never been a full script revealed for the fourth film, we have seen snippets of what could have been, and it justifiably would have been seen as a big gamble by the studios, even though I think it would have actually been quite good. The film was going to be called The Next Mutation, and Eastman and Laird were working on the story as well as drawing sketches of the Turtles, and it was meant to introduce a fifth turtle called Kirby, as this was meant to be a tribute to a comic book idol of theirs, Jack Kirby. But how much truth is there to all of this? Well, the first step in understanding what happened to this film, what was supposed to happen in it, or even just whether it was real, is to ask the creators themselves. We'll start with Kevin Eastman.
Yes, there was a character, a fifth turtle, that was to be named Kirby. It was going to be a male character, and the idea was that he was exposed to the mutagen in the same terrarium that the turtles fell into the sewer and drifted further downstream, and was raised differently. He was a bit bigger and angrier and a different kind of character. The Shredder was going to be made up of not really the real Shredder. He's going to be made up almost completely robotic with out of nanobots, like robot nanobot things that now recreated the Shredder. But yes, we abandoned the movie. It was not to go ahead with New Line in the end. But interestingly enough, we ended up taking that idea to Fox Kids. Saban and Fox Kids teamed up to do a live-action turtle series. And so Kirby was going to be a fifth turtle in a live-action TV series, which then turned into a girl turtle named Venus, which I loved, but a lot of fans didn't love as much. So that is the story of the abandoned fourth movie and the birth of Venus in the TV live-action series, Fox Kids. Cowabunga.
Okay, so there's actually a fair bit to unpack there. Firstly, Kevin Eastman liked Venus. We'll just gloss over that. More importantly, yes, there was meant to be a fifth turtle called Kirby, and there is actually one or two unused sketches of Kirby from the fourth movie in Eastman's autobiography. And not only that, Shredder was meant to come back too, but not as we would remember him, which would make sense because pretty much anyone who's seen the second movie has questioned whether he's actually dead, because in the first movie he was crushed in the garbage truck, but he was just back again in the second film as Super Shredder. In that film he had some decking fall on him, which never seemed like it would be enough to kill him. Having him return as some sort of robot or cyborg form would have been a plausible option, and may have been quite interesting too. So that's Kevin Eastman's side of the story, but what about Peter Laird? Well, he's a bit harder to pin down, but he does have a blog where he posts little seen, or in some cases never seen, snippets of TMNT history. The tricky part is, he's since deleted a lot of the posts about the Next Mutation movie, but through the magic of the internet, we can still find them. He doesn't talk too much about the story, but he does show the characters and talk a bit about what we could expect from them. Laird states that the general idea was that the mutagen was continuing to change the Turtles and Splinter, giving them new abilities and new problems. Of the 4 Turtles, Raph was arguably the most different. He would have had some sort of morphing ability to go from his regular form to a scarier Raptor Raph form with much greater aggression. He claims that while this worked for Raph, this ability was a bit too close to that idea that they had for Splinter, who was meant to be able to get more involved in the fight scenes by morphing into a stronger, more aggressive form. The other 3 Turtles were a little more subtle. Leo was meant to have an ability in which he could morph his skin into something nearly impenetrable. Mikey was able to morph himself into a more human form so that he could pass more freely in normal society. And there was an earlier idea for this, where the Turtles would have basic disguises, and this did actually make it into the cartoon, but admittedly it would have been a bit tricky in a live-action movie, and to be honest, feels more like Raph than Mikey anyway. Donnie's abilities weren't so much physical, but his superior intellect would lead to telekinetic and telepathic abilities, but his eyesight would become increasingly worse as a counterbalance. Until the video Kevin Eastman filmed for us, I'd never been able to find anything about Shredder, and there has never been any confirmation of what role Kirby would play. Would he be an antagonist? Would he be an ally? Would he be both? There's also never really been any confirmation of the storyline in any real capacity. A line from a piece of PR for a toy company at the time described it as a weird world of parallel dimensions and gothic proportions, whatever that's meant to mean. And a proposed sketch for a Cyber Kirby toy was supposedly submitted as well, but that doesn't necessarily tell us much, as all sorts of variations of Turtles have been made in the past. The movie was teased in a 1994 comic book, but no actual details were shared. All we know is that Kirby was meant to be a bigger turtle from the same terrarium as the original 4, Shredder was to return in a robotic form of some kind, and all of the mutants, including Splinter, had additional abilities, or next mutations. The line about other dimensions could relate to what we saw in the TV show, but probably not. And while Peter Laird's blog goes as far as stating that, in retrospect, he didn't like some of the ideas and is glad that it wasn't made, I think we can draw a pretty simple conclusion from what we've managed to unearth. The Next Mutation was potentially going to be a big production with loads of special effects required, and with the declining profits from the second and third movies, it would have been a brave producer to give this the go-ahead. Some of the ideas were used as inspiration in other projects, and of course there was the TV show that came from it, but we agreed not to speak of that again. But what do you think? How would a Robo Shredder and alternative mutations fit together? Let me know down in the comments section, and I will see you all in the next one. Not the next mutation, you know what I mean.